Logo, Indeed. One search, all jobs. Text, @Indeed ENG. Monthly Tech Talks at Indeed's Austin headquarters. Engineering.indeed.com. Dozens of attendees sit in a conference room with 5 male panelists seated in front of a wall with a projected title slide that depicts an iPhone and reads, "The Reality of Mobile Software Development."
First, I want to say thank you all for coming. This is a great crowd. We're excited to have all of you here. Welcome. This is the 16th in our series of Tech Talks here at Indeed. And this time around, we're trying something a little different, as you might have noticed. With the panel, we wanted to actually open up this forum to a wider group of people to talk a little bit more, in particular in Austin, with a group of companies that are doing stuff that is interesting and hopefully would be interesting to a larger group. My name is Chris Hyams. I'm the head of product and international here at Indeed. I've been here for about 4 years. And really briefly, my role, I'm going to moderate here, so I'm just going to do a quick introduction, and then these guys are going to do all the talking. But what we're here for, the name of today's talk is the reality of mobile software development. And what we mean by that is, for a long time, we've had discussions about the sort of future of software development as mobile, and today is the future as far as we're concerned at Indeed. About 3 years ago, less than 10% of our searches were from a mobile device. Today, it's more than 50%. And the way that we kind of look at our business today is that we're a mobile company that also has a website. And that's a big shift from a company that has been a web company for 10 years. And so wanted to kind of get a bunch of people together who have different perspectives on this and different experience of how we all got here, and have a conversation about it. So quick audience participation. First question, how many people here, just raise your hand if your job is to design, build, test, market, etc., mobile site or app?
Some attendees raise their hands.
Okay, so a minority of people. So then for the people who didn't raise your hand, how many of you work somewhere where mobile is important? Maybe it's not your job. Okay, and so how many people work somewhere where mobile is not important at all? Okay, great. So very briefly, just to kind of go through, and I'll do this in order down the line. So Alex Devine, to my left here, has been a software developer at multiple technology startups here in Austin since 2000. He started working at HomeAway in 2006, originally focusing on back-end services and search functionality. Since March of 2013, he's been an architect for mobile, overseeing software architecture for HomeAway's native iOS and Android applications. To his left is David Reese, serves as principal software engineer at RetailMeNot, primarily responsible for building highly scalable API infrastructure and content delivery systems to support RetailMeNot's iPhone, iPad, and Android applications. Over the last 20 years, David has worked on dozens of web apps, mobile apps, and games across PC, console, and iOS platforms. To his left, John M.P. Knox is a senior iOS developer at Evernote, where he helps build Sketch and Evernote. He's been developing apps since 2008, and before that, developed tools for the semiconductor industry. When he's not at work, you'll find him making photographs and windsurfing. And finally, on the end, J. Christopher Garcia is the user experience director here at Indeed. Chris helped launch Indeed's mobile website and was the sole iOS developer at Indeed for many years. He continues to work on mobile job search, A/B testing new features, and improvements. First of all, thank you guys all for coming here today. And I will kick things off by just asking each of you briefly to give a little bit of the context of mobile at your company. So if you could just talk briefly, maybe for a couple of minutes, about both the history of mobile at your company and the current state, what platforms you support, and in particular, what area you're focused on.
Chris hands the microphone to Alex Devine.
Okay, so for HomeAway, if you're not familiar, HomeAway was founded in 2004, and like Chris said, again, we all came from a web background. Our first mobile website, I believe, was either late 2009 or early 2010, and then our first iPhone app was released in 2010. That app was actually outsourced to a third-party company. We brought that in-house in 2011, where it was pretty much the same thing. We had one iPhone developer for a couple of years. And then it was really in the beginning of 2012 where we put a huge investment into mobile, grew the team a lot, brought both iPhone and Android development in-house, and since that time has basically exploded, like most people, I'm sure everyone's aware of. So yeah, it definitely has been a big shift for us from more of like a side project to something that's just crucial to the way HomeAway works.
Alex hands the microphone to David Reese.
Similar story for RetailMeNot, I think. Started as a website and a web-based product that Whaleshark actually acquired, and basically put good business investment in the web product and grew it very well. Saw mobile as a growing force, but didn't exactly know how to take it on. I joined around 2012, and that's actually right about the time they started looking at building out their mobile platform. So the first stab for RetailMeNot at mobile was essentially to recreate the website experience, but on a iPhone. That worked pretty well. We had some good downloads and some good success, but it didn't exactly bring anything new to the table as far as the capabilities of the device were not exploited. So the company kind of continued down that track for a little while, and added the Android platform a bit later, and then sort of made a fundamental shift towards actually trying to exploit the device, invested more heavily in mobile, brought on more resources, and tried to develop some mobile application products. And when I say mobile, I'm talking specifically of the native app. There was always a mobile website that sort of was a sister product to the core website. We added geofencing and location into the product, and realized that we struck a chord with a bunch of our users, and our user base really exploded at that point, and we felt like we were kind of onto something. So we're still sort of in that mindset, trying to balance what smart investments to make that make sense for that kind of device, and still trying to figure it out.
David hands the microphone to John M.P. Knox.
So at Evernote, we started out originally basically being an app for the web and for the desktop, and mobile really came to play, I guess, when the public SDK for iOS first was released by Apple. Somewhat before that, we'd been working on an iPhone app to kind of complement the Mac app, and Evernote somehow managed to show it to somebody who worked at Apple, and they thought it was really cool, and so they kind of featured it in the App Store on day zero of the App Store, and it drove tremendous growth to the Evernote platform. Basically, ever since then, being on every platform, mobile platform natively, has been kind of part of the Evernote growth strategy. We've been featured on many different app stores, Android. We even have apps for Windows Phone. We have a traditional Windows app. We have, I guess it's Windows 8. I don't know what we call that anymore. It used to be Metro, the operating system formerly known as Metro. We have apps there. So we have, of course, all the web app, and we improve all these over time. We have apps for Glass, Google Glass, for the Pebble, pretty much everywhere, and we try to make our apps to basically fit each of these platforms as best we can do it. We adopt the technologies from each of these individual platforms to try to make it a very distinguishable app on those platforms, something that tries to utilize all of the features that they have. And because of that, we get featured a lot, and that helps drive a lot of users to our platform.
John hands the microphone to J. Christopher Garcia.
So as Chris Himes had already mentioned, mobile is really big here at Indeed. Over half of all of the searches that are done from a mobile device. So mobile is a really big part of our business. We are actually one of the most popular free business apps for iOS and Android. And we've managed to do that using our really small engineering team. Going back to how we got started in mobile, first it was just a mobile website, and we were doing that for a while. And I actually became the iOS developer because I had a Mac. And Ronnie, the co-founder, came over and said, well, you've got a Mac, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, why don't you work on this iOS app? I'm sure you can just put it in the store. And I said, well, I don't really know if it works that way. I've never written Objective-C or C, and I don't really write software. I'm the designer, and I'm trying to do these other things. And he was very confident in my abilities, and we kind of muddled through it, and we ended up getting something in the App Store. And that small little idea of an app is turned into a really huge part of our business. So I think every day more than 200,000 people submit mobile applications using our mobile products. So it's really important at Indeed. And again, because of engineering decisions and design decisions we've made, we're able to be really effective on the mobile platform using a really small number of engineers.
Chris Hyams.
So I have a couple of different topics that I want to cover, and what I'll do just to keep things interesting is start each one off with a different person, and then but everyone can kind of chime in. So I think for the next one, let's actually start with Chris, because I think that this is an area where Indeed is actually very different from Evernote. Maybe we can come down the line this way. So from a perspective of thinking about the product, and in particular where you have these multiple different platforms. So there's this one perspective, which is that mobile is just one of many different platforms. So there is some notion of wanting to have consistency of user experience, consistency of design across those platforms. At the same time, mobile is a fundamentally different experience because it's this thing, it's not just a smaller version of your website, it's this thing that you carry around in your pocket and you live and experience with differently. So if you guys want to just address as broadly as you like, and feel free to ask questions of each other here. How is the mobile product different than the desktop, and how do you think about that?
J. Christopher
The
Garcia.
mobile product is just fundamentally different from desktop in that it's so personal. Multiple people will often share a computer, but it's really rare that you would share your phone. Your phone is your phone, and it's yours. And having that context of knowing that when someone's interacting with your service, they're the only ones who are interacting with it from that device. It opens up a lot of opportunities. Design-wise, there's different opportunities on mobile. When we think about mobile, there's mobile web and there's mobile apps, and each one of those actually lends different things. Knowing that a person launched their app, I think it fundamentally means something different than if they browse through their website. We find that a lot of our mobile users who are using our mobile apps are more engaged than our web users. They made a conscious decision to go to the App Store, to download your app, to tap on the icon, and we feel that it leads to different behaviors and it leads to different opportunities. So, the person, because the device is so personal, it leads to a lot of opportunities that make it really hard to do on desktop.
He hands the microphone to John Knox.
So I guess I'm supposed to respond to this. Let's see what to say. Basically, for Evernote, like the reason mobile is important to us is because we want it to be the information that you put into Evernote. You own it. We want you to have the ability to access it no matter where you are, no matter what device you have. And at the same time, we also want to be able to use the technology a mobile phone has to kind of enhance your data. If I were to take a note right now in Evernote from my iOS app, it would geotag it, and it would also automatically title the note with the name of this event, which is helpful. And so there's all this additional data you can get from your mobile device that makes it more useful, more handy, quicker way to get your data and to record data.
Chris Hyams.
But how different are the usage patterns? Like when you look at data that's entered into Evernote via the app versus what someone is going to use via the web or via a native Mac app. Like I use Evernote, I type long form notes in a meeting in the Mac app. I'm not typing long form notes on the mobile app, but I'm taking pictures and tagging them on the phone. So I mean, how differently do you guys think about what the experience is?
John Knox.
We basically look at every platform individually. Just about every platform has its own team of designers and developers. There's some sharing going on, but we look at each platform kind of with fresh eyes, or at least we try to. And so the usage patterns are very different. You see a lot of people taking photos with their mobile devices and taking photos of documents and like business cards, for instance, in their Evernote apps. Because it's a very handy way to get data into Evernote quickly, and of course we OCR and everything. So we see people putting a lot more photographs for sure into Evernote on mobile. People take quick notes And there are also crazy people who attach keyboards to their phones or to their iPads and take lots of notes or all their notes on those devices. I've heard that, like, for instance, iPads are very popular in studios because it doesn't make any sounds when you're typing, and so you can just have all these managers sitting around while you're doing acting or something and just typing away furiously at their email and not paying attention to what's going on, and nobody knows because it's a silent keyboard and it's great. So I don't know. Does that answer the question? We think that each platform kind of has unique capabilities, and that's why we do the native apps for just about everything.
David Reese.
I don't think I have any counterpoints to that. I tend to agree with the notion that it's a very personal device. I mean, you have the sum of human knowledge in your pocket, and if you choose to exercise your option to pull out the device and open up our app, it's a very conscious decision, and we want to maximize that opportunity. And with at least the space that we're in, people who are walking around and shopping, we can provide some real value there that the website product cannot, and even to some extent the mobile web product can't. We know a lot more about you and can help save you money, which is technically our goal. So if you're at a store and we can provide you some content that's very valuable, we want to do that, and that's caused us to diverge the design from its original incarnation as a website built on Objective-C, which is essentially how it started. And that's changed the kind of back-end products that we've had to develop as well. We really had to focus our energy on building out, an in-store offering for taking advantage of the location information, which is something that the desktop site would have never driven. So, personally, I think I see, each sort of platform and the use cases for them and the applications for them having vastly different, UIs and functionalities as suited toward the use case. I don't, certainly the branding should speak to you about what kind of whose product you're using, but past that, I'm not sure I buy this notion of consistent sort of experience from a functionality standpoint.
Alex Devine.
Yeah, I think the only thing I really wanted to add was, from HomeAway's perspective, it's definitely the case where you want to look at each platform as what people are going to do on it. So, for example, a tablet is great for people who are just browsing for vacation rental. You have really big pictures. But from the mobile perspective, I would say don't underestimate what people expect to do on the phone now. So you were saying, like, oh, I wouldn't, like, type out a long email on a phone. Like, I was like, dude, you need a swipe keyboard. That's why. Like, there's definitely, like, people do tons of stuff. And so for HomeAway, a lot of the owner functionality that's currently in the app is focused around, like, responding really quickly to an incoming reservation request or an incoming inquiry. And so that was the main use case that we really wanted to focus on, make it super easy. The responsiveness time, like the time that it takes from someone to submit a booking request till when they actually get a response, is super important for customer sat. So that use case was really important. But now we have owners who are like, well, I basically want to manage tons of stuff about my listing on the phone. Whereas originally we're thinking, oh, those people are going to go to the PC or go to something where it's a little easier. You have bigger screen real estate. You've got a keyboard. But, I mean, people do so much on their phones now that I guess I would just say don't underestimate what people expect to be able to do on a mobile device.
Chris Hyams.
And I guess one question as a result of that, and we don't have to have everyone answer, but if anyone has an answer, one of the things that we've definitely seen is that given the incredible majority of email that is open today on a mobile device, one of the things that we've noticed, you mentioned sort of taking quick action, that emails that have links that when they get clicked need to be able to go somewhere where someone can actually take that action. And so I guess have any of you guys have deep linking into the app directly from emails, or how do you handle mobile clicks on emails?
Alex Devine.
I'll just answer first because we just fixed that bug in the sense that, yeah, the link from the email goes to a website that then, uses some JavaScript to detect. do you already have the app installed? If it does, it will deep link into the app. Otherwise, it will either go to a responsive version of the site or go to a show you a link to download the app. But in that one, the devil is definitely in the details. We had an issue where it was broken on like one version of iOS only, but not the latest version. So, but definitely, yeah, in terms of getting people deep linked into, responding directly to the inquiry or make it easy for them to download the app is really important for us.
Chris Hyams.
David, is that something you guys deal with?
David Reese.
So we've definitely done some, experimentation with that, but I wouldn't say it's something that we've made a lot of utilization of. Certainly, when you get notifications and open up offers, if we can detect that you have the app installed, we'll definitely open that. I think otherwise we go to responsive design. But to Alex's point, the state of each platform I'm less aware of specifically.
Chris?
J. Christopher Garcia.
So since our mobile and our app experiences are so similar, it hasn't been a super big driving force for us to make sure that you're opening in the app. We do on Android, I think, open in the app just because that's the way the app is set up. On iOS, I think we've tried opening in the app, and we didn't really see that it was that much more positive to bring them into the app than rather just leave them on the web. So since our functionality is pretty much on par, it hasn't really been that big of an issue for us. But we do have a lot of people coming from emails, and they just expect to be able to accomplish whatever they need to accomplish. So I don't know that they care as long as they're able to do what they wanted to do.
Great. Well, we can jump to the next topic, and I guess I'll start this one off with David. So some of that was the kind of product and design considerations. Engineering is obviously another big thing, and I think most of the folks here come from the engineering side. So in particular, how do you, John had one very clear sort of directive from his company in terms of it's all native everywhere, essentially as far as they can possibly go. How have you guys approached the native versus web, focusing on the different platforms, and then also if there are any particular engineering challenges around performance or around testing or things like that, but just forced you guys to think about this is completely different than the way that you'd done engineering before?
David Reese.
Yeah, so to the first part of the question, we definitely approach the mobile website separate from the native app, and right from the start wanted the native app to be built on the platform. So there was a brief period of time, I think, right when I started or before I got there, where they built a what we call our MDOT site for handling web requests coming from the mobile device. And in fact, that part of the business is, ever growing consistently. So I do expect to see more, changes in that particular technology stack. But from a development standpoint, the stacks are completely separated. The Android development and the iOS and the iPad are all different, specifically different applications. There is some shared code, obviously, between iOS platform devices. And then on the back end, the tech stack is completely isolated from the website, both MDOT and desktop. And, I guess what I guess I found a little surprising is it was the first time I really had to work with scale so scale and bringing so much content from so many different places down to the device very quickly. Responsiveness is huge. You open it up and you stare at a spinner. You're in a store with bad connectivity. You definitely don't want to be sending down a huge payload or have 30, 40-second, delivery times, things like that. So, we certainly invested very, very heavily in making sure that the payloads are the right size, and we've built the topology of the endpoints very closely with the native app developers to make sure that the content that they're trying to display is there. And then the native app developers put a lot of effort into ensuring that if there is a non-optimal network experience going on, the app still seems to perform pretty well. So, in the cases where the connectivity is bad, you might not even notice that, there's a problem. So it's certainly been challenging, and I guess with our space, the other big thing that I found pretty both scary and exhilarating was holiday shopping. We get massive bursts of traffic once the holidays come, and you don't want to get the phone call from your boss if you're not serving content. And I worked very hard not to get that phone call, and the other side of it is I like to sleep, so I tried to build the things so that I get a sleep. And that's not something that all parts of the company always have to worry about, but we're definitely very sensitive to that because we view the users as a precious resource, and it doesn't take much for a user to have a bad experience and decide that they're going to look elsewhere, and we definitely are sensitive to that.
Alex Devine.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that stuck in my mind was when you were talking about the engineering challenges. I think definitely some of our biggest challenges have been making sure that the business logic between the web side of things and the native side of things stay in sync. And so one was just making sure that all of our services could be easily accessed by both the native app and by the website. But even then, it's a balance because a lot of times you do need to have some amount of business rules in your client if you want to have a responsive UI. And so actually, one of our server devs is in the audience, and he sent out this message on HipChat. He was like, dude, it's like 2,000 lines of JavaScript that that we had some business logic in on the website of things. And there was a couple places in there where like, oh, crap, we need to make sure that logic is that we are following those same business rules on the native side of things. So I guess my recommendation there, in which we've been making a push towards, and that we're doing more, is pushing as much as possible, like everything that you can think of, up to the server. Because if you have to duplicate it, there's a good chance that you're going to get it wrong at some point, whether it's a bug fix in one platform and not in the other. So we've been making a real strong push to get things up to the server. We still have a way where we can do some differentiation between calls that come from the native app and calls that come from the website. But that's definitely, I think, been a real big challenge. And so to think about how on one sense, you want things to be the same, but some cases you have a reason to have some differentiation. It's that maintaining that balance has been hard for us.
Chris Hyams.
So John, in particular, you guys not only have different platforms. I actually looked at the Wikipedia page for Evernote, and like just counting the number of platforms was dizzying. But as you mentioned, Glass, Pebble. I mean, you have all these different things that are not even just different platforms. They're just a completely different, user experience. So how do you approach that stuff?
John Knox.
Well, like I said, we tend to have different teams look at the different platforms, and so the designers and the people, the developers and the product managers work on that. They'll basically look at the platform and try to figure out what the unique pieces are. They want to build something for each platform that's going to blend in with, the rest of the native ecosystem, but also, have the kind of the Evernote characteristics as well. So it's kind of this balancing act where you want people to be familiar from both sides. They want it to be a familiar Evernote experience. They want it to be a familiar like Android or iOS or Windows experience, but they also want to be distinct and look really sharp. But because we have this kind of platform strategy, we intentionally try to pick the new stuff that's coming out on each platform, and if we can figure out a way to use that in our app, that's like one of the ways you can get featured in the App Store, is that you kind of adopt all the look and feel of the platform, like iOS 7, for instance. There was a big push to get a lot of the UI redesigned in the iOS app and adopt new features, the parallax and the more transparent look to it and all these different technologies that they introduced, and take advantage of that. And another thing was like the smart covers, Evernote Peak. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where you could kind of have the flashcard where you'd open up your smart cover just a little bit, and you could see the question, and you try to remember it, and then you open it a little bit more, you can see the answer, and then you can kind of register what got it right or wrong, and stuff like that. Like, really gets the interest of the App Store. Like, oh wow, here's like they're taking advantage of this feature of the product we didn't even know that you could take advantage of, and try to, so we get creative with that, and oftentimes it works out in our favor, and people want to take advantage of all the features of the phone. There's a reason why you spend $700 on a telephone, that you put in your pocket. It's not to make phone calls. You want to use the GPS, and you want to use the accelerometer, and the beautiful Retina display, and that camera that takes 42 megapixels or whatever that crazy Nokia phone is, and they want all that stuff. So we try to use it as best as we can.
J. Christopher Garcia.
Actually, kind of going to what Alex was saying, we've managed to be able to leverage a lot of our code across our web and apps. So we've kind of been lucky in that we don't have to have a lot of duplication, but because of the way that the initial stuff was all set up, the stuff that we do for web is actually distinct from what we do for mobile. So we do actually run into this problem where it's like we figure something out on web, but then we have to go do that same thing on mobile.
And for clarity, when you say web, you mean desktop?
I mean desktop,
web.
desktop web. So when we figure something out for desktop, for the website on desktop, we have to go and redo that thing again for mobile. And you just really want to reduce the amount of duplication that you have to do at all. It's a pain to do something and then have to do it twice. It just introduces not only that much more time, but it's just prone to errors. And so now you're just introducing this other place where you might have a bug, or you might do it wrong, or something might fail. And here's one more system that might go down, and you're gonna have to figure out why. So yeah, as much as we try to not duplicate code, there still are instances where we duplicate it, and we just try to reduce that duplication down to the smallest parts, and really try to keep the UI layers as thin as possible.
John Knox.
Just a quick counterpoint on that. Yeah, we do have, obviously, like for each platform, it's completely different code doing a lot of the same things, and but really what it all boils down to is the data that we store on our servers. So that's kind of the unifying force for everything. Is like no matter what you do on the phone, we still have to find a way to get that data and the metadata down to the server and stored there and synchronized across all your devices. So I think that helps a little bit. Like it makes it so that we don't, if somebody introduces a new feature on Android, like we have an ink feature in Android now where you can actually like draw with your finger or a stylus into a note. We don't have that on iOS. They don't have an equivalent feature. But because we have to get it down into the cloud, we basically, they're still viewable on iOS. They render as images. You can't edit them, but it all boils down to the data in the same place, and it's viewable across all the devices. And so that helps. The interesting thing is always when something really takes off, we tried an idea in Android, like ink, maybe that'll really take off, and then all of a sudden I have to write a new feature in the iOS app that uses ink, and I have to learn how that works. And but that's it's kind of fun, and it's kind of a way to experiment with features, right? Try it out on a platform and see what the performance is, and then decide if you want to invest in the other platforms.
Chris Hyams.
Great. I'll just throw out one more question, and then what I want to do is open it up to questions from the audience. So if you have questions, think about them, and then we'll pass around the mics, and feel free to ask questions of anyone. One thing, and we had gotten together a couple times before this to talk about things, and one of the things that came up was, were all companies that started out not focused on mobile and then have had to sort of make that transition? And so the question is, for you guys, what was the sort of either the biggest kind of aha moment in that shift in terms of, oh, this is something that works or something that doesn't work, or what was the biggest terrible mistake that you made that you then had to go and undo? Is there something that was surprising that if you had known when you started, it would have been helpful?
J. Christopher Garcia.
Again, Ronnie had come up to me and said, "Hey, I want you to build this iOS app and everything." And again, the idea, this kind of lean startup principle and all that kind of stuff is like, let's just put the web in an app. It's just basically going to be the website, and why don't you put that in the App Store and see if anybody downloads it? And the designer part of me was kind of reluctant to do that. I was like, wow, that doesn't really seem like that's going to be that great of an experience. Like, we can do all these things on the device. Like, we should really be working with these transitions and animations and really creating this awesome experience. And, it seems like it's going to be kind of lame just to put mostly web content up on this app. And after just kind of going around and around, we finally decided, okay, let's just do it, let's try it. Because if nobody downloads the app, there's really no point in investing the resources to do it native. And over time, I found that was actually a really good decision, and we've benefited a lot engineering-wise. But that initial reluctance of having this preconceived notion of, I don't think this is going to be a good experience, and it's not going to be good enough, and so I don't want to do it. And being able to kind of work through that and see that, my personal my personal outlook and my personal views on what's acceptable and what's necessary, or necessarily what our users have. They have different values, and it's really when I align my values to theirs, and when we as a company align our values to theirs, and trying to really focus on getting them the jobs. We help people get jobs, and as long as we're always focused on doing that, a lot of the other stuff is secondary or even tertiary. And so that was really eye-opening to me. Again, it was just thinking about, like, as a designer, I might be reluctant to do something, but trying to be open enough to the experience and trying to think of all of the benefits that could be gained by trying stuff a different way.
Alex Devine.
Yeah, I would say one recommendation, especially coming from the website of things, where you're really used to just being able to, put out a release like that, and you don't have that luxury at least in the native mobile world, is to, from your very first version, make sure that you have some way where you can pop up like an app alert from your server. Either say, hey, like, you need to download a later version because you're on a really old version. We had a bug just a couple weeks ago where, unfortunately, it slipped through QA because it was a path that the problem was that we weren't remembering owner logins, and it went through QA because if you actually went to a different part of the app, you didn't see that bug, and then it was forever saved. But so if you want to find out a great way to get tons of one-star reviews, make your users log in every time they get the app. So that was not fun. But so we found it out in like that same day. We had a fix out, and it was out. And again, we had to go through the App Store, approval process, which really sucks. Like, I really hate the App Store approval process. It's just way easier on Android. But if we had some way to just message to the user, like, hey, there's actually this, one-click workaround that you can get it so it will save your credentials. It would have, taken a lot of pain off of us. So I would definitely, and it's one of these things that, like, you hit it the first time and you're like, oh yeah, we should make sure we have that functionality. But if you build it in from the very first version, then even people that are back on older versions, we had another case where we had a native iPad app at one point. We decided that we'd actually rather use the responsive UI in our website to focus that for tablet users, and then we discovered that Apple will not let you take the tablet app, the iPad app, out of your binary. So we're like, oh, we were really scared of. So basically, we had to open it up under an entire new app ID, and we didn't have a real easy way to message all the people that had the app, hey, you need to download this other app. So that was really painful. But just to have that functionality, and again, if you're coming from the web world, you're so used to just being able to put out a release like that. Backwards compatibility is definitely something you need to plan for in the native world.
David Reese.
So I think our aha moment was definitely geofencing and location services. That definitely, got the company excited about the mobile application in a way that, hadn't been done before. It also sort of opened up the imagination to a bunch of other things that we could be doing. And so we started doing some of those. Passbook comes to mind as, after a great aha moment, we were, oh, this Passbook thing's coming out. We went to the conference. We're all excited, put a bunch of engineering effort into, making the data flows work all the way in the back end down to the app, and getting, the proper systems in place for operations people to deal with it. And then at the last minute, weren't able to actually use it. And it's still probably sitting there, in various attributes on a bunch of database tables and sent down to the client empty most of the time and not being used. So, that's definitely kind of frustrating. It would have been nice to, figure that out ahead of time. So I would call that sort of a failure in our product design a little bit, but also that's going to happen, I think. So it small morale kick, but it wasn't too bad. I'd say one of the biggest technical challenges we've had, is the version craziness, especially when we're dealing with our data model migrations between app versions. Between iPhone versions, and I'll pick on iPhone here because I don't know, I think Android had similar problems, but I don't know them as well. Between the iOS version, the app version, and the jump you're making when you're doing the download, sometimes something goes wrong, and I guess if you're lucky, they just lose their data. If you're unlucky, the app crashes all the time, and that really blows. So the please download the app is definitely a good thing to be able to bring up to deal with that, and begging Apple to rush your app approval is also something that you might have to do. I think the only other challenge we've really had from a technical standpoint, and oops, is when we were first integrating our geo notifications on the client app. We have a bunch of analytics and reporting in there, and all of a sudden we get all these signals about our apps being used by an order of magnitude different across the week of an app release, and obviously something's wrong. It takes many hours of painful debugging and with Wireshark and whatever else was going on for them to figure out that every time some notification happened, it triggered some API call that inside the app that sent the signal to the server that indicated the user was using the app when they weren't. And so, those kinds of things are very, very frustrating because you look at that API call and it's, hey, I'm reading some code. I don't need to grab that data from somewhere else. I've got this one thing that'll do it. But, oh, that thing also reports that the users are interacting with the app when they actually might not be.
John Knox.
Well, I think I already mentioned probably the historical biggest aha moment was getting featured in the original App Store. But I guess along those lines, more recently, one of the bigger wake-up moments I think for Evernote was last year's security breach, and you can read about that online. A lot of the information were basically the password hashes were stolen, not the passwords themselves, and we made the decision basically to disable everybody's passwords and make them create new passwords. And I think we basically pushed a new version of every single app to every single app store in I don't remember how many days. It was 2 or 3 days. It was a very long weekend. I don't remember how many days were in that weekend. It was long. And that was kind of it was an interesting experience, and it made us kind of realize just how important it is to kind of be prepared for these kind of events. Like they're saying, being able to send messaging to your users through the app is a very useful thing to do. If you don't have that, looking at something like Urban Airship might be very helpful because you can do all sorts of interesting things with that to message your users if you don't want to build the infrastructure yourself. But yeah, being prepared for these kind of eventualities, no matter who you are, if you're big enough, somebody's going to try to, they're going to find a way to get some sort of exploit against you, and you have to be kind of prepared for that moment. And so we've built up, a security team and built up a lot more infrastructure to kind of deal with this in case, if something goes wrong again in the future. Hopefully it won't, because we have a great security team. But it's important to be able to kind of respond in an emergency like this.
Chris Hyams.
Great. Well, let's open things up now. Looks like we've got, so I don't even have to prompt anything. We got a question right there.
So I've been hearing a lot of Apple, Retina, and I know all of your teams are small. It just sounds like we're pushing Android off to the side. Maybe between less engagement with the users, fragmentation. Is that the reality with your engineering teams, is that you're spending more resources, significantly more on the Apple side of things than your other platforms? Or is that just what I'm hearing?
John Knox.
Well, I happen to be doing iOS development work at Evernote. We do have a large Android team, and we have a lot of users on Android. I have been an Android developer in the past, and I can tell you it's a platform that we have a lot of interest in because we get a lot of users from it. And we, like I was saying, we have the ink feature on Android only, I believe, at this point. So, we don't neglect our other platforms as long as it looks like they're, growing platforms. If you're, some old like Nokia Symbian or something like that, we're probably not going to like write some fancy app for you. But for real growing platforms, yeah.
J. Christopher Garcia.
Yeah, I think we spend the same amount of time on Android as on iOS. They're both the same. Again, we try to keep all the features the same, or try to create a consistent experience across all platforms. So we're spending about the same amount of time, or at least the same amount of effort, I'd say.
David Reese.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I just happen to be a Mac user and initially an iOS developer, so I probably lean that way when I speak. And I think the company did initially, just because we didn't want to start up both platforms at the same time. But after we kind of got our legs under us and got the investment up in the Android platform and got some parity between the two, we worked pretty hard to keep it that way. I won't say it doesn't swing a little iOS-y now and again, but for the most part, I think we do a much better job now.
Alex Devine.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we have 2 native Android developers, 2 native iOS developers. I think we all probably started with iOS just because it was first, but they're definitely, we see them as equal platforms. Again, Android is growing, worldwide, growing much faster than iOS, so it's huge for us.
Chris points at an attendee.
Hi, thanks. My question is more along the lines of, it sounds like you guys are, each one of these companies on the panels are focusing on iOS versus Android at some point or another. I guess lately there's been a push towards developing hybrid mobile solutions using PhoneGap or Cordova, MeanStack or JavaScript. I kind of favor that, but 2 questions. Is there a reason why you're not doing that now? And if you had the opportunity to do it all over again, would you build a hybrid solution rather than have 2 iOS developers and 2 Android developers? Thanks.
Alex Devine.
Well, for HomeAway, now we actually are using some PhoneGap stuff. So we acquired a company called Glad to Have You in April, and their app was all in PhoneGap. And so we were actually really lucky that it was, because we were able to actually embed the section for what we call the hospitality portion of the app, which we reskinned it, and it's a HTML5 PhoneGap section of the app, and that's actually from our aha moment. I mean, I'm really proud that we were able to get that out super quickly, and it doesn't feel jarring in the sense that it doesn't try to replicate native controls, so it has its own separate UI, but it feels nice in the app. But in terms of the balance between native and whether you're going to do something that's cross-platform, for us, the biggest driving factor originally was the idea that if someone just has to pick your app out of the App Store, like there's nothing that's really kind of forcing them to do so. We felt that native was important because you can really get to all of the nitty-gritty of the platform. I mean, John, I think, speaks a lot to this, to like, hey, you can flip stuff up. For one, we have a separate app for it's targeted towards our property managers to their employees. Okay, now that's something that's like the property manager is going to tell you have to use this app. Okay, so we're not, and that is a case where that was a PhoneGap app, and we got a lot of leverage being able to do that. So I would say it's a tough call, more so now because the website of things, the PhoneGap side of things has I think advanced a lot more than it was. But still, I mean, there's still definitely a lot of benefit that you can do in the UI that I just think is you might hit that point where like, oh, we have this like a little bit of jitteriness on Android, especially at the moment for some of our HTML5 stuff. So if you're really, really concerned about super smooth, like super slickness, we go to native. But if you can take more like, hey, we need to get more productivity out of it, and as long as it's it looks nice, but you can take a little more off the fit and finish, then I think a lot of the cross-platform stuff works great.
John Knox.
So I don't want to be a broken record on this native versus non-native stuff. Obviously, we do a lot of native stuff, but there are parts of our apps that are basically web views, and that allows us to reuse some code, some JavaScript code, or for instance, like the Evernote Market, I believe, is a web view, and I think the content's pretty much the same for Android and iOS. The Market, if you're not familiar with it, it's basically a curated physical store. You can buy like bags and moleskin notebooks and that sort of stuff, and there's no reason that shouldn't just be, basically a nice-looking web view, because it doesn't have to be high performance. It's a catalog, right? You're looking at it just has to look nice. So yeah, we do native stuff. That said, there are some beautiful apps out there that are based on things like PhoneGap, and they're awesome, and you wouldn't be able to tell if they're non-native. That said, if you're doing stuff that has lots of animation and you want to use the cutting-edge features of the platform, or you have large amounts of data to process, things like technologies like JavaScript are they might hold you back, and it might be more difficult to figure out how to do things, especially like processing large amounts of data. Like, you're going to run out of the amount of memory you can possibly allocate to like a web view, for instance. If you have these huge DOMs, it'll be very difficult to debug potentially. So you can do it, but buyer beware.
J. Christopher Garcia.
Yeah, and again, it probably depends on where you are in your business too. If the choice is I've got to hire 4 engineers and it's going to cost so much money, and I'm not actually going to be able to do that, or how much is that going to really cost me? Does that put me in a bad position? Or I can put something in the store and see if it works. If the choice is being in the store or not being in the store, then you should probably just use PhoneGap and do it, and hopefully that's successful, and hopefully you'll find out exactly why it's successful, and you'd be able to leverage your success into getting engineering talent when you need it, and you can convert things and make it even better. But I don't think like you have to start off with engineers necessarily. Again, it really depends on where you are in a business and what kind of product you're actually going to field too. Trying to do maybe a really intense game in PhoneGap may not work out so well, or reading files from the network, or media playing apps, like those might not really be well suited. So it depends on your particular circumstance. But I think all these tools are great. I think it's great that we have a range and we can mix and match them, and it doesn't have to be either or. We can use them to whenever they advantage us the most.
For a lot of people, they think that this is like, in terms of getting into an app store, that going one way versus the other is going to save them money, and I don't think that's necessarily true, because I think being able to write a native app for iOS is kind of, that's not a super common skill, say, but being able to write HTML and JavaScript app for an iPhone is also a rare skill, and maybe even more rare than just writing a native iPhone app. So I don't know if it's true that that's going to be cheaper or not, and you have to think about that. And you should think also, why do you want to be in the App Store? Is it really part of your strategy, or is it kind of a vanity thing? Because apps are not cheap to build, maintain, and once you get it in there, the expectation is kind of that you're going to keep going with it if your company's an ongoing business, right? So you're committing to this kind of ongoing support, and oops, iOS 22 came out and it broke our app that we wrote for iOS 6. What are we going to do now?
Attendee.
My question is around, everything that you've talked so far has been from the development side of things. And so you got the app out, now it's being used. What sort of complexities and challenges, if any, does it raise in terms of, instrumentation, data analytics, data gathering side of things? So, the non-user facing side of things, stuff that product managers and business side of things looks at. So what kind of complexities and challenges has that raised?
John Knox.
Well, if you understand Google Analytics, you can instrument basically any of these apps the same way you would instrument a web page and have it feed right into a standard Google Analytics dashboard. That said, Google Analytics can be very difficult to understand at times, and so there are alternatives like Flurry, and I think Crashlytics is now getting into this as well. There, I think, are quite a few other competitors in the analytics space.
David Reese.
So we definitely have tried several vendors as far as reporting suites, and some of the decisions were very conscious from, we wanted sort of a second source of truth on if the data points we were getting were actually accurate. So we actually instrumented with 2 different providers sometimes, as well as our own sort of home rolled. So, I think a challenge for us is really if you ask the people in the back office sort of the company, what kind of reporting do you want? They say everything, but everything costs 25% of our engineering manpower on an app release, and so that's probably a bad decision. And then turning around that data and showing it in some meaningful way requires a certain amount of expertise, and often the people who put it in there have to be leveraged, and so now your engineers aren't always programming. So I don't think it's a simple matter to get some analytics. I think it's you have to be careful that you choose the right things to instrument and invest in it appropriately. I think we've kind of, as a company, swung from one end of the spectrum to the other and are sort of now swinging back, but it's a little bit of a learning journey for us in that regard.
Do the numbers match up?
Most of the time.
Alex Devine.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you mentioned Crashlytics. Like, Crashlytics is the bomb. It is so great. Like, and not just, it does crash reporting, but you're right, they're getting more into their answers products. We also use Google Analytics, and we have had problems with bad data, essentially, in terms of our sampling rate being wrong, but fundamentally, Google Analytics, it feeds right into the dashboard. It works the same, pretty much the same as web analytics. So from that perspective, it's pretty equivalent.
J. Christopher Garcia.
We have our own in-house tools that we use to log information, and so we're able to use those same tools. It's not any different in the web versus the app. So again, we're leveraging all the tools and the reporting that we have, and we're able to reuse that for everything. So yeah, ours is pretty simple and straightforward. Although I was interested because we had talked about crashes and bugs and QA earlier. It's really hard for us. We've got a relatively simple app, but bugs still get through, and we've tried Flurry to try to get some data, but QAing, doing QA is hard, and figuring out what bugs users are experiencing out in the wild it just seems baffling. I read reviews and they're like, oh, this thing is crashing, and I open it up and I did this thing and it crashes, and people are complaining, and it's real hard to reproduce the scenarios that your users are describing. Like, are you using Flurry or you're using Crashlytics? Is that helping you guys find these bugs and squash them?
John Knox.
Yeah, at Evernote we're using we're using Hockey app, I think, for some of our stuff, and I think we're trying out Crashlytics and other stuff, and they're both really great tools for finding bugs. I have a personal project that uses Crashlytics, and man, if you want to see like kind of an incredible experience, like installing like a library or framework in a product, holy moly, man, you should see how slick this thing is they have. It's pretty cool. And the reports are also very slick and nice, and it's kind of an experience. It's pretty cool. You're like, oh yeah, awesome, a crash. Now I can go use Crashlytics. Let's see what cool new UI thing they've done on their website today. It's kind of cool.
Alex Devine.
To that Crashlytics, to that specific question, what I really like now is that in Crashlytics, it has this metric of percent users have a crash-free experience, and percent users that have percent of sessions that have a crash-free experience. So, we want that, 99.9 plus, and it orders or crashers by the number of users that are impacted. So it's really easy. You just open it up, and you're like, boom, boom, boom. Those are our crashers that the most people are experiencing. So it's and to that point, the install process is just like, one line basically. It's a great product. I'm really impressed with it.
Attendee.
I'm wondering about Java performance in Android. I guess it's pretty good, but is there any case for using C++? I believe that's called NDK as opposed to SDK in Android. Is that worth doing, or do you lose features, or you just never even bothered to think about that?
John Knox.
Oh man, Android questions. Okay, so keeping in mind that I'm mostly an iOS developer, we do use NDK for some stuff because like you said, there can be some issues, especially when using large amounts of memory with Java. Although it's not, the language is Java, but the runtime is actually different. And I think they just introduced a new, faster runtime. The original one is called Dalvik, and I don't remember the name of the new one. Art. Yeah, that sounds right. Art. And I don't remember what that stands for. But yes, there are definitely some reasons to use the NDK. I don't think it's something you want to be using all the time. And it's kind of like a dark art, as I understand it, of like doing game development in Java and stuff. And you hear about all these tricks where they like basically allocate all this memory in order to cause the garbage collection to be triggered and all this stuff, so that they can get as much memory as possible for the game. And it's kind of nuts, but I haven't heard of anybody doing like going 100% NDK unless they're doing like something like a game. But you should probably talk to somebody who has a lot more Android experience than I do, and there are definitely some of them wandering around because I've seen them.
Alex Devine.
Along those lines, we don't do anything, but I was reading a pretty interesting article in terms of sharing logic between iOS and Android, that they actually, some of their logic components they wrote in C++ and pulled into both iOS and Android. So if you're really brave and you want to write native C++ for iOS and Android, it can be done.
Attendee.
Y'all went over some of the metrics, and earlier you talked about crashing. That's not a good one. What are some other metrics that you track besides the core ones, and what insights have you found with your reports?
John Knox.
Oh boy. So crashes are very important. We track basically every screen, every view controller that people visit in our app, and basically that's how we can measure like the feature usage on the app. If I recall correctly, in Sketch, we're measuring basically which tools people were using, so we kind of get an idea of what people actually found more useful inside the app. And I seem to remember that we've learned some very interesting thing about like people use. I think it's based on location actually. I remember somebody saying in the Middle East, like people use like just the ink a lot inside of Sketch, because apparently it's like a really convenient way to like actually like draw text, I guess, in Arabic. So it's kind of interesting. Apparently we have lots of users there. So that's just some examples I've heard of. I don't, it's not my area of expertise inside of Evernote for sure.
David Reese.
We try to track, we probably track too much inside the app, but we really try to track every place that a user goes, how long they stay there, what they engage with, what they don't engage with, if we signal them on something, if they respond to it, so from the, application standpoint, we really are trying to understand how our users are, interacting with the product. Maybe even getting more sophisticated and, trying out different things within the app is something we're looking at. So, I think it's definitely very important, especially when your product starts getting more mature. On the sort of back-end side, we measure sort of every interaction the app has with our servers for purposes of, response times, if the content was served within our SLAs, did we see like crazy data coming across, how many requests we're getting for the different, kinds of calls, those sorts of things. So, I think it's very important, and any mature product should really be having a lot of both application level signals and analytics inside of it, as well as what's going on the server.
Alex Devine.
One thing that we recently added to our apps was Lean Plum for A/B testing on the native side of things, and I think we've only just done one. So, but that's something that I'm really excited about, because from a product engineering design perspective, to see how those changes really make a difference to user behavior. Because we have the standard kind of conversion metrics and all the same metrics you'd have on a website, for example, that are just part of our business. But from a product and engineering perspective, the A/B testing is something I'm really looking forward to us doing a lot more A/B tests on our native platforms.
J. Christopher Garcia.
So again, we do a lot of logging. We log everything. We log our users using the app and what we show them and what they clicked on and things. So we'd mentioned earlier that job seekers who use the app are much more engaged than job seekers who just bounce in from web. And that makes a lot of sense, right? They made a conscious decision to go to the App Store. They're going to install it. They didn't just follow some link and land on the page. So it's reasonable to assume that they're more engaged, and our data backs that up. One interesting thing that I found just recently, because we're going through some email thread, and we were talking about the size of the HTML that we push down, right? So we measure that on both a desktop web and for our mobile applications, what's the size of the HTML that we're pushing down to the client. and we were looking at some graphs and seeing how it's changed over time. And I noticed that the HTML that we push down to our mobile clients is half as big as the HTML that we're pushing down to the desktop clients, which is great because we obviously want that to be very small because, network latency and all that kind of stuff, and it's a small device. But what's interesting about that too is we show them twice as many results. So we're showing job seekers twice as many results and doing it with half as much file size. Again, this isn't including all the other CSS and all that, but it is really good. I think taking a responsive approach is better than not doing anything in a lot of cases, but sometimes just putting a responsive layer on top of whatever you're doing on desktop doesn't lead to great performance. Again, we've made a conscious decision that we're going to serve out a specific UI just for our mobile users. We do that for performance reasons, and I think that's paid off. When I was looking at this graph, I was like, oh, I'm glad we didn't do responsive stuff because look how fast it is. And I think it also works out really well product-wise because it gives you this opportunity to really look at what you're doing on desktop and saying, what's valuable out of here? What's the most important thing that I can do? What's the second most important thing? And it gives you a context to kind of even make your desktop site better by removing features that just really aren't needed or really aren't effective anymore. So.
John Knox.
Yeah, if you want to get really deep into this, I highly recommend that you look into talks and blog posts by Patrick McKenzie, who's probably one of the kings of A/B testing and analytics stuff out there. But one of the things you do have to be careful of when you do this, be cautious of, is you'll see stuff like, oh, very few people are using this feature. Let's take it out of our app. And then, well, it turns out that there's all your power users who are very vocal and have lots of followers who are using that feature, and they're very angry with you all of a sudden, and or you get lots of negative reviews because it was key to somebody's workflow or whatever. And the other thing is, too, that you want to be very clear if you're using analytics and your privacy policy and kind of, depending on your business and your marketing, about how you're collecting this data and what data you're using. It's critical to Evernote's business that people understand that they own their data, and we're not going to mine their data or sell their data that they're putting into Evernote. Our analytics are basically aggregated, and it's this very high-level stuff about what screens people are viewing. It's not at all about their content. And when we do figure out that, oh, this is why they're using this tool in the Middle East or whatever, it's because we'll see people tweeting stuff out, or we have people tell us that. We hear lots of stories about how people use it, especially when we delete their feature, and then we learn, oh, that's what they're doing with that. Okay, cool, we'll put that back. We promise, really soon.
Sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions. We've gone a little bit over here, but I know at least some of us, I'll definitely be here, Chris will be here. If you have other questions, feel free to come on up. This was obviously, we really appreciate all you guys coming out. Thank you once again to all of you guys. If everyone could just give a quick round of applause for the panelists here.
Logo, Indeed. One search, all jobs.